Panama Canal Spanish. Canal de Panama is an artificial 82-kilometer, 51-mile waterway in Panama that connects the Caribbean Sea with the Pacific Ocean. It cuts across the narrowest point of the Isthmus of Panama and is a conduit for maritime trade between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Locks at each end lift ships up to Gatun Lake, an artificial freshwater lake 26 meters 85 feet above sea level, created by damming the Sugars River and Lake Alajuela to reduce the amount of excavation work required for the canal. Locks then lower the ships at the other end. An average of 200 ml, 52 million US gal, of fresh water is used in a single passing of a ship. The canal is threatened by low water levels during droughts. The Panama Canal shortcut greatly reduces the time for ships to travel between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, enabling them to avoid the lengthy, hazardous route around the southernmost tip of South America via the Drake Passage, the Strait of Magellan, or the Beagle Channel. Its construction was one of the largest and most difficult engineering projects ever undertaken. Since its inauguration on August 15, 1914, the canal has succeeded in shortening maritime communication in time and distance, invigorating maritime and economic transportation by providing a short and relatively inexpensive transit route between the two oceans, decisively influencing global trade patterns, boosting economic growth in developed and developing countries, as well as providing the basic impetus for economic expansion in many remote regions of the world. Colombia, France, and later the United States controlled the territory surrounding the canal during construction. France began work on the canal in 1881, but stopped in 1889 because of a lack of investors' confidence due to engineering problems and a high worker mortality rate. The U.S. took over the project in 1904 and opened the canal in 1914. The U.S. continued to control the canal and surrounding Panama Canal Zone until the Torrijos-Carter treaties provided for its handover to Panama in 1977. After a period of joint American-Panamanian control, the Panamanian government took control in 1999. It is now managed and operated by the Panamanian government-owned Panama Canal Authority. The original locks are 33.5 meters, 110 feet wide, and allow the passage of Panamax ships. A third, wider lane of locks was constructed between September 2007 and May 2016. The expanded waterway began commercial operation on the 26th of June 2016. The new locks allow for the transit of larger, Neo-Panamax ships. Annual traffic has risen from about 1,000 ships in 1914, when the canal opened, to 14,700 vessels in 2008, for a total of 333.7 million Panama Canal Universal Measurement System (PC) UMS tons. By 2012, more than 815,000 vessels had passed through the canal. In that year, the United States, China, Chile, Japan, and South Korea were the top 5. In 2017, it took ships an average of 11.38 hours to pass between the canals to outer locks. The American Society of Civil Engineers has ranked the Panama Canal one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. History main article, History of the Panama Canal. Early proposals in Panama. The idea of the Panama Canal dates back to 1513, when the Spanish conquistador Vasco Núñez de Balboa first crossed the Isthmus of Panama. European powers soon noticed the possibility to dig a water passage between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans across this narrow land bridge between North and South America. The earliest proposal dates to 1534, when the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V ordered a survey for a route through the Americas in order to ease the voyage for ships traveling between Spain and Peru. 6. In 1668, the English physician and philosopher Sir Thomas Browne specifically proposed the Isthmus of Panama as the most convenient place for such a canal. The first attempt actually to make the isthmus part of a trade route was the ill-fated Darien scheme, launched by the Kingdom of Scotland 1698 to 1700, which was abandoned because of the inhospitable conditions. In 1811, the German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt published an essay on the geography of the Spanish colonies in Central America, Essai politique sur le royaume de la Nouvelle-Espagne, translated into English as Political Essay on the Kingdom of New Spain, containing researches relative to the geography of Mexico. In the essay, he considered 5 possible routes for a canal across Central America, including Panama, but concluded that the most promising location was across Nicaragua, traversing Lake Nicaragua. 9. His recommendations influenced the British to attempt a canal across Nicaragua in 1843. Although this attempt in the end came to nothing, it resulted in the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty 1850 between the United Kingdom and the United States, in which the two nations bound each other to joint control of any canal built in Nicaragua or by implication anywhere in Central America. 1885 map showing the railway and the proposed Panama Canal route in 1846, the Malo-Reno-Bidlack Treaty, negotiated between the U.S. and New Granada, the predecessor of Colombia, granted the United States transit rights and the right to intervene militarily in the Isthmus. In 1848, the discovery of gold in California created a demand for a crossing of Panama as a practical route between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This demand was exploited by American businessman William Henry Aspinwall, who ran steamship legs from New York City to Panama, and from Panama to California, with an overland portage through Panama. This route was soon exploited by other businessmen, such as Cornelius Vanderbilt. Between 1850 and 1855, a syndicate founded by Aspinwall built a railroad, now the Panama Canal Railway, from Colon on the Caribbean Sea to Panama City. The project cost $8 million United States dollars, 6 times the estimated cost, and between 6,000 and 12,000 of construction workers who succumbed to tropical diseases. However, the railroad soon became immensely profitable for its owners. In 1870, U.S. President Grant established an Interoceanic Canal Commission, which commissioned several naval officers, including Commander Thomas Oliver Selfridge, Jr., to investigate the possible routes suggested by Humboldt for a canal across Central America. The commission decided in favor of Nicaragua, establishing this as the preferred route amongst American policymakers. French construction attempts, 1881 to 1899. Ferdinand and de Lesseps, the French originator of the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal. The French diplomat and entrepreneur Ferdinand and de Lesseps was the driving force behind French attempts to construct the Panama Canal 1881 to 1889. De Lesseps had made his reputation by successfully constructing the Suez Canal 1859 to 1869, a route which had soon proved its value in international commerce. After this success, he actively sought new projects. In 1875, de Lesseps was approached by the Société Civile Internationale du Canal Interoceanique de Darien, also known as the Tour Syndicate, a syndicate formed to promote the building of an interoceanic canal across Panama. Its directors were Hungarian freedom fighter Istvánter, financier Jacques de Reinach, and Tour's brother-in-law Lt. Lucien Bonaparte Wise. Between 1876 and 1878, Bonaparte Wise and Armand Reclus investigated several potential routes across the Isthmus of Panama. Bonaparte Wise rode by horseback to Bogota, where he obtained a concession from the Colombian government to build a canal across Panama the 20th of March 1878. The agreement, known as the Wise Concession, was valid 99 years and allowed the company to dig a canal and exploit it. Part D fondateur of the Compagnie Universelle du Canal Interoceanique de Panama, issued the 29th of November 1880. In May 1879, de Lesseps convened an international congress in Paris to examine the possibilities of a ship canal across Central America. Among the 136 delegates of 26 countries, only 42 were engineers, with the remainder being speculators, politicians, and friends of de Lesseps. De Lesseps used the Congress to promote fundraising for his preferred scheme, which was to build a sea-level canal across Panama. along similar lines to Suez. De Lesseps was able to gain approval of a majority of the delegates for his plan, despite reservations expressed by some who preferred a canal in Nicaragua or who emphasized the likely engineering difficulties and health risks. Following the Congress, de Lesseps organized a company to construct the canal, the Compagnie Universelle du Canal Interoceanique de Panama. The company bought the Wise concession from the Tour Syndicate and was able to raise considerable funds from small French investors on the basis of the huge profits generated by the Suez Canal. Construction of the canal began on the 1st of January 1881, with digging at Culebra beginning on January 22nd. A large labor force was assembled, numbering about 40,000 in 1888, 9/10 of whom were Afro-Caribbean workers from the West Indies. Although the project attracted good, well-paid French engineers, retaining them was difficult due to disease. The death toll from 1881 to 1889 was estimated at over 22,000, of whom as many as 5,000 were French citizens. Excavator at work in Bas Obispo, 1886. From the beginning, the French canal project faced difficulties. Although the Panama Canal needed to be only 40% as long as the Suez Canal, it was much more of an engineering challenge because of the combination of tropical rainforests, debilitating climate, the need for canal locks, and the lack of any ancient route to follow. Beginning with Armand Reclus in 1882, a series of principal engineers resigned in discouragement. The workers were unprepared for the conditions of the rainy season, during which the Sugars River, where the canal started, became a raging torrent, rising up to 10 meters 33 feet. Workers had to continually widen the main cut through the mountain at Culebra and reduce the angles of the slopes to minimize landslides into the canal. The dense jungle was alive with venomous snakes, insects, and spiders, but the worst challenges were yellow fever, malaria, and other tropical diseases, which killed thousands of workers. By 1884, the death rate was over 200 per month. Public health measures were ineffective because the role of the mosquito as a disease vector was then unknown. Conditions were downplayed in France to avoid recruitment problems, but the high mortality rate made it difficult to maintain an experienced workforce. In France, de Lesseps kept the investment and supply of workers flowing long after it was obvious that the targets were not being met. But eventually, the money ran out. The French effort went bankrupt in 1889 after reportedly spending $287 million United States dollars, $9.73 billion in 2023. An estimated 22,000 men died from disease and accidents, and the savings of 800,000 investors were lost. Work was suspended on May 15th, and in the ensuing scandal, known as the Panama Affair, some of those deemed responsible were prosecuted, including Gustave Eiffel. De Lesseps and his son Charles were found guilty of misappropriation of funds and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. This sentence was later overturned, and the father, at age 88, was never imprisoned. In 1894, a second French company, the Compagnie Nouvelle du Canal de Panama, was created to take over the project. A minimal workforce of a few thousand people was employed primarily to comply with the terms of the Colombian Panama Canal concession, to run the Panama Railroad, and to maintain the existing excavation and equipment in saleable condition. The company sought a buyer for these assets, with an asking price of $109 million United States dollars, $3.84 billion in 2023. In the meantime, they continued with enough activity to maintain their franchise. So lobbyists would become particularly active in later negotiations to sell the interests of the Compagnie Nouvelle. The American lawyer William Nelson Cromwell began looking after the interests of the company in 1894. After first acting for the related Panama Railroad, he would become deeply involved as a lobbyist in the American decisions to continue the canal in Panama and to support Panamanian independence. The other was Felipe Boone Alvarilla, who, as one of the major subcontractors to the first French company, had been compelled by the receivers to take shares in the Compagnie Nouvelle, and was then named Director of Engineering in the Compagnie Nouvelle. United States acquisition. The U.S.'s intentions to influence the area, especially the Panama Canal construction and control, led to the separation of Panama from Colombia in 1903, the Culebra Cut in 1896, the Culebra Cut in 1902. At this time, U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt and the United States Senate were interested in establishing a canal across the isthmus, with some favoring a canal across Nicaragua and others advocating the purchase of the French interests in Panama. Boone Varela, who was seeking American involvement, asked for $100 million, but accepted $40 million in the face of the Nicaraguan option. In June 1902, the U.S. Senate voted in favor of the Spooner Act to pursue the Panamanian option, provided the necessary rights could be obtained. On the 22nd of January 1903, the Hay-Herran Treaty was signed by United States Secretary of State John M. Hay and Colombian Charge Tomás Herran. For $10 million and an annual payment, it would have granted the United States a renewable lease in perpetuity from Colombia on the land proposed for the canal. The treaty was ratified by the U.S. Senate on the 14th of March 1903. But the Senate of Colombia unanimously rejected the treaty since it had become significantly unpopular in Bogota due to concerns over insufficient compensation, threat to sovereignty, and perpetuity. Roosevelt changed tactics, based in part on the Mallarino-Bidlack Treaty of 1846, and actively supported the separation of Panama from Colombia. Shortly after recognizing Panama, he signed a treaty with the new Panamanian government under terms similar to the Hay-Herran Treaty. On the 2nd of November 1903, U.S. warships blocked sea lanes against possible Colombian troop movements en route to put down the Panama Rebellion. Panama declared independence on the 3rd of November 1903. The United States quickly recognized the new nation. This happened so quickly that by the time the Colombian government in Bogota launched a response to the Panamanian uprising, U.S. troops had already entered the rebelling province. The Colombian troops dispatched to Panama were hastily assembled conscripts with little training. While these conscripts may have been able to defeat the Panamanian rebels, they would not have been able to defeat the U.S. Army troops that were supporting the Panamanian rebels. An army of conscripts was the best response the Colombians could muster, as Colombia was recovering from a civil war between liberals and conservatives from October 1899 to November 1902, known as the Thousand Days War. The U.S. was fully aware of these conditions and even incorporated them into the planning of the Panama Intervention, as the U.S. acted as an arbitrator between the two sides. The peace treaty that ended the Thousand Days War was signed on the USS Wisconsin on the 21st of November 1902. While in port, the U.S. also brought engineering teams to Panama with the peace delegation to begin planning the canal's construction before the U.S. had even gained the rights to build the canal. All these factors would result in the Colombians being unable to put down the Panamanian Rebellion and expel the United States troops occupying what today is the independent nation of Panama. On the 6th of November 1903, Felipe Boone Varela, as Panama's ambassador to the United States, signed the Hay-Boone Varela Treaty, granting rights to the United States to build and administer the Panama Canal Zone and its defenses. This treaty gave the U.S. some rights to the canal in perpetuity, but in Article 20 limited other rights to a lease period of 99 years. Almost immediately, the treaty was condemned by many Panamanians as an infringement on their country's new national sovereignty. This would later become a contentious diplomatic issue among Colombia, Panama, and the United States. President Roosevelt famously stated, "I took the isthmus, started the canal, and then left Congress not to debate the canal, but to debate me." Several parties in the United States called this an act of war on Colombia. The New York Times described the support given by the United States to Boone Varela as an act of sordid conquest. 38-39. The New York Evening Post called it a vulgar and mercenary venture. 40. The U.S. maneuvers are often cited as the classic example of U.S. gunboat diplomacy in Latin America and the best illustration of what Roosevelt meant by the old African adage, "Speak softly and carry a big stick and you will go far." After the revolution in 1903, the Republic of Panama became a U.S. protectorate until 1939. 41 in 1904, the United States purchased the French equipment and excavations, including the Panama Railroad, for $40 million United States dollars, of which $30 million related to excavations completed primarily in the Culebra Cut, valued at about $1 per cubic yard. 42. The United States also paid the new country of Panama $10 million and a $250,000 payment each following year. In 1921, Colombia and the United States entered into the Thomson-Arusha Treaty, in which the United States agreed to pay Colombia $25 million, $5 million upon ratification, and for $5 million annual payments, and grant Colombia special privileges in the Canal Zone. In return, Colombia recognized Panama as an independent nation. United States construction of the Panama Canal. 1904 to 1914, Chief Engineer John Frank Stevens, Sanitation Officer William C. Gorgeist, U.S. formally took control of the canal property on the 4th of May 1904, inheriting from the French a depleted workforce and a vast jumble of buildings, infrastructure, and equipment, much of it in poor condition. A U.S. government commission, the Isthmian Canal Commission (ICC), was established to oversee construction. It was given control of the Panama Canal Zone, over which the United States exercised sovereignty. 40. For the Commission reported directly to Secretary of War William Howard Taft and was directed to avoid the inefficiency and corruption that had plagued the French 15 years earlier. On the 6th of May 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt appointed John Finley Wallace, formerly Chief Engineer and finally General Manager of the Illinois Central Railroad, as Chief Engineer of the Panama Canal Project. Overwhelmed by the disease-plagued country and forced to use often dilapidated French infrastructure and equipment. 45. As well as being frustrated by the overly bureaucratic ICC, Wallace resigned abruptly in June 1905. 46. The ICC brought on a new chairman, Theodore P. Shantz, and a new chief engineer was appointed, John Frank Stevens, a self-educated engineer who had built the Great Northern Railroad. 47. Stevens was not a member of the ICC. He increasingly viewed its bureaucracy as a serious hindrance, bypassing the commission and sending requests and demands directly to the Roosevelt administration in Washington, D.C. One of Stevens' first achievements in Panama was in building and rebuilding the housing, cafeterias, hotels, water systems, repair shops, warehouses, and other infrastructure needed by the thousands of incoming workers. Stevens began the recruitment effort to entice thousands of workers from the United States and other areas to come to the Canal Zone to work. Workers from the Caribbean, called Afro-Panamanians, came in large numbers and many settled permanently. Stevens tried to provide accommodation in which the workers could work and live in reasonable safety and comfort. He also re-established and enlarged the railway, which was to prove crucial in transporting millions of tons of soil from the cut through the mountains to the dam across the Sugars River. President Theodore Roosevelt sitting on a Buckera steam shovel at Culebra Cut. 1906 construction work on the Gaylord Cut. 1907 Colonel William C. Gorges had been appointed Chief Sanitation Officer of the canal construction project in 1904. Gorges implemented a range of measures to minimize the spread of deadly diseases, particularly yellow fever and malaria, which had recently been shown to be mosquito-borne, following the work of Cuban epidemiologist Carlos Finley, American pathologist Walter Reed, and Scottish physician Sir Ronald Ross. 48 Investment was made in extensive sanitation projects, including city water systems, fumigation of buildings, spraying of insect breeding areas with oil and larvicide, installation of mosquito netting and window screens, and elimination of stagnant water. Despite opposition from the commission, one member said his ideas were balmy. Gorgas persisted, and when Stevens arrived, he threw his weight behind the project. After 2 years of extensive work, the mosquito-spread diseases were nearly eliminated. 49. Despite the monumental effort, about 5,600 workers died from disease and accidents during the U.S. construction phase of the canal. Of these, the great majority were West Indian laborers, particularly those from Barbados. The number of Americans who died was about 350. Besides healthier and far better living conditions for the workers, another benefit given to American citizens working on the canal was a medal for 2 years of service. Additional bars were added for each 2-year period after that. Designed by Victor D. Brenner and featuring the then-current president, they were popularly known as the Roosevelt Medal. 51. A total of 7,189 were ultimately issued, with a few people receiving as many as for bars. In 1905, a U.S. engineering panel was commissioned to review the canal design, which had not been finalized. In January 1906, the panel, in a majority of 8-5, recommended to President Roosevelt a sea-level canal. 53, as had been attempted by the French and temporarily abandoned by them in 1887 for a 10 locks system designed by Felipe Bunau-Varilla, and definitively in 1898 for a lock and lake canal designed by the Comite technique of the Compagnie Nouvelle du Canal de Panama as conceptualized by Adolphe Godin de Lepine in 1879. But in 1906, Stevens, who had seen the sugars in full flood, was summoned to Washington. He declared a sea-level approach to be an entirely untenable proposition. He argued in favor of a canal using a lock system to raise and lower ships from a large reservoir 85 feet 26 meters above sea level. This would create both the largest dam, Gettin Dam, and the largest human-made lake, Gettin Lake, in the world at that time. The water to refill the locks would be taken from Gettin Lake by opening and closing enormous gates and valves and letting gravity propel the water from the lake. Gettin Lake would connect to the Pacific through the mountains at the Gaillard-Culebra Cut. Unlike Godin de Lepine, with the Congrès International d'Etudes du Canal Interoceanique, Stevens successfully convinced Roosevelt of the necessity and feasibility of this alternative scheme. 55. The construction of a canal with locks required the excavation of more than 17 million cubic yards, 13 million cubic meters of material over and above the 30 million cu-id, 23 million cubic meters, excavated by the French. As quickly as possible, the Americans replaced or upgraded the old, unusable French equipment with new construction equipment that was designed for a much larger and faster scale of work. Over 100 railroad-mounted steam shovels were purchased, 77 from Buckira-Siri and 25 from the Marion Power Shovel Company. These were joined by enormous steam-powered cranes, giant hydraulic rock crushers, concrete mixers, dredges, and pneumatic power drills, nearly all of which were manufactured by New. Extensive machine-building technology developed and built in the United States. The railroad also had to be comprehensively upgraded with heavy-duty, double-tracked rails over most of the line to accommodate new rolling stock. In many places, the new Gettin Lake flooded over the original rail line, and a new line had to be constructed above Gettin Lake's waterline. Between 1912 and 1914, there was a controversy about the tolls for the canal. 56. Construction of locks on the Panama Canal. 1913, Goethals replaces Stevens as chief engineer. General George Washington Goethals, who completed the canal in 1907. Stevens resigned as chief engineer. 57. His replacement, appointed by President Theodore Roosevelt, was U.S. Army Major George Washington Goethals of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Soon to be promoted to lieutenant colonel and later to general, he was a strong, West Point-trained leader and civil engineer with experience in canals, unlike Stevens. Goethals directed the work in Panama to a successful conclusion in 1914, 2 years ahead of the target date of the 10th of June 1916. Goethals divided the engineering and excavation work into three divisions: Atlantic, Central, and Pacific. The Atlantic Division, under Major William L. Sibbert, was responsible for construction of the massive breakwater at the entrance to Bahia Limon, the Gatun Locks, and their 3 plus 12-mile 5.6 kilometers approach channel, and the immense Gatun Dam. The Pacific Division, under Sidney B. Williamson, the only civilian member of this high-level team, was similarly responsible for the Pacific 3-mile, 4.8 kilometers breakwater in Panama Bay, the approach channel to the locks, and the Miraflores and Pedro Miguel locks, and their associated dams and reservoirs. The Central Division, under Major David Du Bois-Gaillard of the United States Army Corps of Engineers, was assigned one of the most difficult parts, excavating the Culebra Cut through the Continental Divide to connect Gatun Lake to the Pacific Panama Canal locks. This flooded the Culebra Cut, thereby joining the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans via the Panama Canal. Alexander LaValle, a floating crane built by Lobnitz and Company and launched in 1887, was the first self-propelled vessel to transit the canal from ocean to ocean. This vessel crossed the canal from the Atlantic in stages during construction, finally reaching the Pacific on the 7th of January 1914. SS Cristobal, a cargo and passenger ship built by Maryland Steel, and launched in 1902 as SS Tremont on the 3rd of August 1914, was the first ship to transit the canal from ocean to ocean. The construction of the canal was completed in 1914, 401 years after Panama was first crossed overland by the Europeans in Vasco Núñez de Balboa's party of conquistadors. The United States spent almost $500 million, roughly equivalent to $15.2 billion, in 2023, 64 to finish the project. This was by far the largest American engineering project to date. The canal was formally opened on the 15th of August 1914, with the passage of the cargo ship SS Ankin. The opening of the Panama Canal in 1914 caused a severe drop in traffic along Chilean ports due to shifts in maritime trade routes. Despite the closure of the canal for nearly 7 months after a landslide in the Culebra Cut on the 18th of September, the burgeoning sheep farming business in southern Patagonia suffered a significant setback by the change in trade routes, as did the economy of the Falkland Islands. Throughout this time, Ernest Red Holland was hired by the Isthmian Canal Commission to document the progress of the work. In 1914, steam shovels from the Panama Canal were purchased and put to use in Chuquicamata copper mine of northern Chile. Later developments as Missouri, an Iowa-class battleship, passes through the canal on the 13th of October 1945. The 108 feet to 30 to 0.97 meters beams of the Iowas and preceding South Dakota class were the largest ever to transit the canal. By the 1930s, water supply became an issue for the canal, prompting construction of the Madden Dam across the Sugars River above Gatun Lake. Completed in 1935, the dam created Madden Lake, later Lake Alajuela, which provides additional water storage for the canal. In 1939, construction began on a further major improvement, a new set of locks large enough to carry the larger warships that the United States was building at the time and planned to continue building. The work proceeded for several years, and significant excavation was carried out on the new approach channels, but the project was canceled after World War II. After World War II, U.S. control of the canal and the canal zone surrounding it became contentious. Relations between Panama and the United States became increasingly tense. Many Panamanians felt that the zone rightfully belonged to Panama. Student protests were met by the fencing in of the zone and an increased military presence there. 76 demands for the United States to hand over the canal to Panama increased after the Suez Crisis in 1956, when the United States used financial and diplomatic pressure to force France and the UK to abandon their attempt to retake control of the Suez Canal, previously nationalized by the Nasser regime in Egypt. Panamanian unrest culminated in riots on Martyrs' Day, the 9th of January 1964, when about 20 Panamanians and 5 U.S. soldiers were killed. Statement on the Panama Canal Treaty signing duration, 6 minutes and 47 seconds. 6:47 President Jimmy Carter's speech upon signing the Panama Canal Treaty, the 7th of September 1977. Problems playing this file? See media help. A decade later, in 1974, negotiations toward a settlement began and resulted in the Torrio-Scarter Treaties. On the 7th of September 1977, the treaty was signed by President of the United States Jimmy Carter and Omar Torrijos, de facto leader of Panama. This mobilized the process of granting the Panamanians free control of the canal, so long as Panama signed a treaty guaranteeing the permanent neutrality of the canal. The treaty led to full Panamanian control, effective at noon on the 31st of December, 1999, and the Panama Canal Authority Act assumed command of the waterway. The Panama Canal remains one of the chief revenue sources for Panama. Before this handover, the government of Panama held an international bid to negotiate a 25-year contract for operation of the container shipping ports located at the canal's Atlantic and Pacific outlet. The contract was not affiliated with the ACP or Panama Canal operations and was won by the firm Hutchison Whampoa, a Hong Kong-based shipping interest owned by Li Ka-shing. 80 21st Century Claims by Donald Trump on the 21st of December, 2024 U.S. President-elect Donald Trump asserted that the United States should retake control of the Panama Canal from Panama, claiming that the rates Panama was charging American ships were exorbitant and in violation of the Torrio-Scarter Treaties. The following day, he claimed that the canal was falling into the wrong hands, referring to China. Shortly afterwards, Panamanian President Jose Raul Mulino responded, denying that the United States was being unfairly charged or that anyone besides Panama was in full control of the canal, and affirming that the canal was part of the country's inalienable patrimony. On the 24th of December, a protest was held at the U.S. Embassy in Panama City over Trump's threat to take back the Panama Canal. Protesters referred to him as a public enemy of Panama. On the same day, the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, ALBA, made up of 10 Central and South American countries, denounced Trump's comments and affirmed its support for Panama's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and self-determination. On the 7th of January 2025, Trump, in a press conference, vowed to gain control of the Panama Canal. He refused to rule out economic and military action against Panama to seize control of the canal, to secure what he called U.S. economic security. 86-87. He reiterated his intent to take back control of the canal in his inaugural address on the 20th of January. Gatun Lake provides the water used to raise and lower vessels in the canal, gravity-fed into each set of locks. Created in 1913 by damming the Sugars River, the Gatun Lake is a key part of the Panama Canal, providing the millions of liters of water necessary to operate its locks each time a ship passes through. At time of formation, Gatun Lake was the largest human-made lake in the world. Lock Size Mine article. Panama Canal locks because of the importance of the canal to international trade. Many ships are built to the maximum size allowed. Mitre Lock Gate at Gatun. For its first century, the width and length of ships that may transit the canal was limited by the Pedro Miguel locks. Their draft by the canal's minimum 12.6 meters 41.2 feet depth, and their height by the main span of the bridge of the ships built to those limits are known as Panamax vessels. A Panamax cargo ship typically has a deadweight tonnage DWT of 65,000 to 80,000 tons, but its actual cargo is restricted to about 52,500 tons because of the canal's draft restrictions within the canal. The longest ship ever to transit the canal was the San Juan Prospector, now Marcona Prospector, an orbal coil carrier that is 296.57 meters, 973 feet, long with a beam of 30.31 meters, 106 feet. Initially, the locks at Gatun were designed to be 28.5 meters, 94 feet wide. In 1908, the United States Navy requested that the width be increased to at least 36 meters, 118 feet, to allow the passage of large warships. A compromise was made and the locks were built 33.53 meters, 110.0 feet wide. Each lock is 320 meters, 1,050 feet long, with the walls ranging in thickness from 15 meters 49 feet at the base to 3 meters 9 point. The central wall between the parallel locks at Gatton is 18 meters 59 feet thick and over 24 meters 79 feet high. The steel lock gates measure an average of 2 meters 6.6 feet thick, 19.5 meters 64 feet wide, and 20 meters 6. Panama Canal pilots were initially unprepared to handle the flight decks of aircraft carriers, which protrude beyond the hull on either side of the ship. When USS Saratoga made her first trip through the Gatton locks in 1928, the ship knocked over all the concrete lampposts along the canal. In 2016, a decade-long expansion project created larger locks, allowing bigger ships to transit through deeper and wider channels. 98. The allowed dimensions of ships using these locks increased by 25% in length, 51% in beam, and 26% in draft, as defined by Neo-Panamax metrics. Tolls roll-on, roll-off ships, such as this one at Miraflores Locks, are among the largest ships to pass through the canal. As with a toll road, vessels transiting the canal must pay tolls. Tolls for the canal are set by the Panama Canal Authority and are based on vessel type, size, and the type of cargo. For container ships, the toll is assessed on the ship's capacity expressed in 20-foot equivalent units, TES, one toy being the size of a standard intermodal shipping container. Effective the 1st of April 2016, this toll went from $70 for United States dollars per loaded container to $60 per toy capacity, plus $30 per loaded container for a potential $90 per toy when the ship is full. A Panamax container ship may carry up to 4,400 TEU. The toll is calculated differently for passenger ships and for container ships carrying no cargo in ballast. As of April 1, 2016, the ballast rate is 60 United States dollars, down from 65 United States dollars and 60 cents per toy. Passenger vessels in excess of 30,000 tons PC, UMS pay a rate based on the number of berths, that is, the number of passengers that can be accommodated in permanent beds. Since the 1st of April 2016, the per-berth charge is $111 for unoccupied berths and $138 for occupied berths in the Panamax locks. Starting in 2007, this fee has greatly increased the tolls for such ships. 101. Passenger vessels of less than 30,000 tons or less than 33 tons per passenger are charged according to the same per-ton schedule as are freighters. Almost all major cruise ships have more than 33 tons per passenger. The rule of thumb for cruise line comfort is generally given as a minimum of 40 tons per passenger. Most other types of vessels pay a toll per PC, UMS net ton, in which 1 ton is actually a volume of 100 cubic feet to 0.83 cubic meters. The calculation of tonnage for commercial vessels is quite complex. As of fiscal year 2016, this toll is 5 United States dollars and 25 cents per ton for the first 10,000 tons, 5 United States dollars and 14 cents per ton for the next 10,000 tons, and 5 United States dollars and 6 cents per ton thereafter. As with container ships, reduced tolls are charged for freight ships in ballast for $0.19, for $0.12, for $0.05 respectively. On the 1st of April 2016, a more complicated toll system was introduced, having the Neo-Panamax locks at a higher rate in some cases, natural gas transport as a new separate category, and other changes. 102. As of the 1st of October 2017, there are modified tolls and categories of tolls in effect. 103 small, less than 125 feet, vessels up to 583 PC, UMS net tons when carrying passengers or cargo, or up to 735 pc, UMS net tons when in ballast, or up to 1,048 fully loaded displacement tons, are assessed minimum tolls based upon their length overall, according to the following table as of the 29th of April, 2015. Length of vessel toll up to 15.2 for meters, 50 ft 800 United States dollars from 15.2 for to 24.38 for meters, 50 to 80 feet, 1,300 United States dollars, from 24.38 for 230.48 meters, 80 to 100 feet, to 1,000 United States dollars more than 30.48 meters, 100 feet, 3,200 United States dollars. Intra-maritime cluster. Local tour is more than 24.38 for meters, 80 feet, to 1,000 United States dollars plus 70 to dollars. To Morgan Adams of Los Angeles, California, holds the distinction of paying the first toll received by the U.S. government for the use of the Panama Canal by a pleasure boat. His boat La Sata passed through the zone on the 14th of August 1914. The crossing occurred during a 10,000-kilometer, 6,000-mile sea voyage from Jacksonville, Florida, to Los Angeles in 1914. The most expensive regular toll for canal passage to date was charged on the 14th of April 2010 to the cruise ship Norwegian Pearl, which paid $375,600 United States dollars. The average toll is around 50 for 1,000 United States dollars. The highest fee for priority passage, charged through the transit slot auction system, was $220,300 United States dollars, paid on the 24th of August 2006 by the Panamax tanker Aracusa, bypassing a 90-ship queue waiting for the end of maintenance work on the Gatton locks, and thus avoiding the normal fee would have been just $13,430 United States dollars. The lowest toll ever paid was 36 cents, equivalent to $6.39 in 2023, by American Richard Halliburton, who swam the Panama Canal in 1928. Efficiency and maintenance proponents to the 1977 Torrio-Scarter treaties feared that efficiency and maintenance would suffer following the U.S. withdrawal from the Panama Canal zone. However, this has been proven not to be the case. In 2004, it was reported that canal operations, capitalizing on practices developed during the American administration, were improving under Panamanian control. Canal waters time CWT, the average time it takes a vessel to navigate the canal, including waiting time, is a key measure of efficiency. In the first decade of the 2000s, it ranged between 20 and 30 hours, according to the ACP. The accident rate has also not changed appreciably in the past decade, varying between 10 and 30 accidents each year from about 14,000 total annual transits. An official accident is one in which a formal investigation is requested and conducted. Increasing volumes of imports from Asia, which previously landed on U.S. West Coast ports, are now passing through the canal to the American East Coast. 114. The total number of ocean-going transits increased from 11,725 in 2003 to 13,233 in 2007, falling to 12,855 in 2009. The canal's fiscal year runs from October through September. 115. This has been coupled with a steady rise in average ship size and in the numbers of Panamax vessels passing through the canal, so that the total tonnage carried rose from 227.9 million PC UMS tons in fiscal year 1999 to a then record high of 312.9 million tons in 2007, and falling to 299.1 million tons in 2009. 91. 115. Tonnage for fiscal 2013, 2014, and 2015 was 320.6, 326.8, and 340.8 million PC UMS tons, carried on 13,660, 13,481, and 13,870 for Gatton locks, showing the mule locomotives at work. Mule in the Miraflores locks. In the first decade after the transfer to Panamanian control, the Panama Canal Authority, ACP, invested nearly $1 billion United States dollars in widening and modernizing the canal, with the aim of increasing capacity by 20%. 117, the ACP cites a number of major improvements, including the widening and straightening of the Culebra Cut to reduce restrictions on passing vessels, the deepening of the navigational channel in Gatun Lake to reduce draft restrictions and improve water supply, and the deepening of the Atlantic and Pacific entrances to the canal. This is supported by new equipment, such as a new drill barge and suction dredger, and an increase of the tugboat fleet by 20%. In addition, improvements have been made to the canal's operating machinery, including an increased and improved tug locomotive fleet, the replacement of more than 16 kilometers, 10 miles of locomotive track, and new lock machinery controls. Improvements have been made to the traffic management system to allow more efficient control over ships in the canal. In December 2010, record-breaking rains caused a 17-hour closure of the canal. This was the first closure since the U.S. invasion of Panama in 1989. The rains also caused an access road to the Centenario Bridge to collapse. Capacity vessel draft restrictions on the Panama Canal by locks 2022 to 2020 for Neo-Panamax. Panamax Canal handles more vessel traffic than had ever been envisioned by its builders. In 1934, it was estimated that the maximum capacity of the canal would be around 80 million tons per year. As noted above, canal traffic in 2015 reached 340.8 million tons of shipping. To improve capacity, a number of improvements have been made to maximize the use of the locking system. Competition maximum ship sizes for the Panama and Suez Canals. Canal faces increasing competition from other quarters. Because canal tolls have risen as ships have become larger, some critics 128 have suggested that the Suez Canal is now a viable alternative for cargo between Asia and the U.S. East Coast. The Panama Canal, however, continues to serve more than 144 of the world's trade routes, and the majority of canal traffic comes from the all-water route from Asia to the U.S. East and Gulf coasts. An alternative route through Nicaragua and Lake Nicaragua has been proposed. On the 15th of June 2013, Nicaragua awarded the Hong Kong-based HKND Group a 50-year concession to develop a canal through the country. In February 2018, analysts widely viewed the project as defunct, though the head of the project insisted work was ongoing. In April 2018, HKND Group closed its offices, leaving no forwarding address or telephone numbers to be reached. The increasing rate of melting of ice in the Arctic Ocean has led to speculation that the Northwest Passage or Arctic Bridge may become viable for commercial shipping. This route would save 9,300 kilometers, 5,800 miles on the route from Asia to Europe, compared with the Panama Canal, possibly leading to a diversion of some traffic to that route. However, such a route is beset by unresolved territorial issues and would still hold significant problems owing to ice. Water issues. Water level at Gatun Lake from January 1965 through August 2024. Gatun Lake is filled with rainwater, and the lake accumulates excess water during wet months. For the old locks, water is lost to the oceans at a rate of 101,000 cubic meters, 26.7 million U.S. gal, 81.9 acre-ft per downward lock movement. The ship's submerged volume is not relevant to this amount of water. During the dry season, when there is less rainfall, there is also a shortage of water in Gatun Lake. As a signatory to the 2000 United Nations Global Compact and member of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the ACP developed an environmentally and socially sustainable program for expansion, which protects the aquatic and terrestrial resources of the canal watershed. The expansion uses 3 water-saving basins at each new lock, diminishing water loss. It also preserves freshwater resources along the waterway by reusing 60% of water from the basins in the locks in each transit. The mean sea level at the Pacific side is about 20 centimeters 8 in higher than that of the Atlantic side due to differences in ocean conditions, such as water density and weather. The 2015-2016 fiscal year was one of the driest periods on record, restricting ships' passage. 2019 was the fifth driest year for 70 years. Temperature rise has also caused an increase in evaporation. 142. In normal times, 36 ships can transit the canal each day, but in early December 2023, ships were backing up because only 22 ships per day could transit due to low water levels. In January 2024, 24 ships per day were allowed to transit. As demand is rising for efficient global shipping of goods, the canal is positioned to be a significant feature of world shipping for the foreseeable future. However, changes in shipping patterns, particularly the increasing numbers of larger-than Panamax ships, necessitated changes to the canal for it to retain a significant market share. In 2006, it was anticipated that by 2011, 37% of the world's container ships would be too large for the present canal, and hence a failure to expand would result in a significant loss of market share. The maximum sustainable capacity of the original canal, given some relatively minor improvement work, was estimated at 340 million UMS tons per year. It was anticipated that this capacity would be reached between 2009 and 2012. Close to 50% of transiting vessels were already using the full width of the locks. An enlargement scheme to allow for a greater number of transits and the ability to handle larger ships, similar to the third lock scheme of 1939, had been under consideration for some time. 146. And by 2006, Panama's government canal authority was recommending such a plan. The expansion proposal, with a cost estimate of $5.25 billion United States dollars, was expected to double the canal's shipping capacity by allowing both the passage of longer and wider post-Panamax ships and an increase in this proposal was approved in a national referendum by about 80% on the 22nd of October 2006. The canal expansion was built between 2007 and 2016. New Agua Clara locks Atlantic side in operation. The expansion plan had two new flights of locks built parallel to and operated in addition to the old locks, one east of the existing Gatton locks and one southwest of the Miraflores locks, each supported by approach channels. Each flight ascends from sea level directly to the level of Gatton Lake. The existing two-stage ascent at Miraflores and Pedro Miguel locks was not replicated. The new lock chambers feature sliding gates, doubled for safety, and are 427 meters 1,400 feet long, 55 meters 180 feet wide, and 18.3 meters 60 feet deep. This allows the transit of vessels with a beam of up to 49 meters 160 feet, an overall length of up to 366 meters 1,200 feet, and a draft of up to 15 meters 49 feet, equivalent to a container ship carrying around 12,000 containers. Each 6.1 meters 20 feet, the new locks are supported by new approach channels, including a 6.2 kilometers 3.9 miles channel at Miraflores from the locks to the Gaylord Cut, skirting Miraflores Lake. Each of these channels is 218 meters 720 feet wide, which will require post-Panamax vessels to navigate the channels in one direction at a time. The Gaylord Cut and the channel through Gatton Lake were widened to at least 280 meters 920 feet on the straight portions and at least 366 meters 1,200 feet on the bends. The maximum level of Gatton Lake was raised from 26.7 to 27.1 meters 88 to 89 feet. These gravity-fed basins allow 60% of the water used in each transit to be reused. The new locks consequently use 7% less water per transit than each of the existing lock lanes. The deepening of Gatton Lake and the raising of its maximum water level also provide capacity for significantly more water storage. These measures are intended to allow the expanded canal to operate without constructing new reservoirs. The estimated cost of the project is $5.25 billion United States dollars. The project was designed to allow for an anticipated growth in traffic from 280 million UMS tons in 2005 to nearly 510 million UMS tons in 2025. The expanded canal will have a maximum sustainable capacity of about 600 million UMS tons per year. Tolls will continue to be calculated based on vessel tonnage, and in some cases depend on the locks used. An article in the February 2007 issue of Popular Mechanics magazine described the engineering aspects of the expansion project. 150. There is also a follow-up article in the February 2010 issue of Popular Mechanics. On the 3rd of September 2007, thousands of Panamanians stood across from Paraíso Hill in Panama to witness a huge initial explosion and launch of the expansion program. The first phase of the project was the dry excavations of the 218 meters, 715 feet wide trench connecting the Gaylord Cut with the Pacific coast, removing 47 million cubic meters of earth and rock. By June 2012, a 30 meters reinforced concrete monolith had been completed, the first of 46 such monoliths, which will line the new Pacific side lock walls. 153. By early July 2012, however, it was announced that the canal expansion project had fallen 6 months behind schedule, leading expectations for the expansion to open in April 2015 rather than October 2014, as originally planned. By September 2014, the new gates were projected to be open for transit at the beginning of 2016. Neo-Panamax ship passing through the Agua Clara locks was announced in July 2009 that the Belgian dredging company Jan de Nul, together with a consortium of contractors consisting of the Spanish Sacyr Vallehermoso, the Italian Impregiolo, and the Panamanian company Grupo Cusa, had been awarded the contract to build the 6 new locks for $3.1 billion United States dollars, which was $1 billion less than the next highest competing bid due to having a concrete budget 71% smaller than that of the next bidder and allotted roughly 25% less for steel to reinforce that concrete. The contract resulted in $100 million in dredging works over the next few years for the Belgian company and a great deal of work for its construction division. The design of the locks is a carbon copy of the Berendrecht lock, which is 68 meters wide and 500 meters long, making it the second largest lock in the world after the Keeldrecht lock in the port of Antwerp, Belgium. Completed in 1989 by the port of Antwerp, which de Nul helped build, the company still has engineers and specialists who were part of that project. In January 2014, a contract dispute threatened the progress of the project. There was a delay of less than 2 months, however, with work by the consortium members reaching goals by June 2014. In June 2015, flooding of the new locks began, first on the Atlantic side, then on the Pacific. By then, the canal's re-inauguration was slated for April 2016. On the 23rd of March 2016, the expansion inauguration was set for the 26th of June 2016. The new locks opened for commercial traffic on the 26th of June 2016, and the first ship to cross the canal using the third set of locks was a modern Neo-Panamax vessel, the Chinese-owned container ship COSCO Shipping Panama. 98. The original locks, now over 100 years old, allow engineers greater access for maintenance and are projected to continue operating indefinitely after the construction of the new locks, in addition to the already existing ones. To date, the ship with the largest dimensions transiting the Panama Canal new sideway had the following dimensions: 366.47 meters in length, 48.23 meters in width, and 15 meters draft. The total cost is unknown, since the expansion's contractors are seeking at least an additional $3.4 billion United States dollars from the Canal Authority due to excess expenses. Environmental and ecological consequence: Panama Canal, one of the most important choke points in global trade, has caused many environmental and ecological problems since it was built and expanded. These problems include deforestation, the spread of invasive species, water and air pollution, and water shortage. Deforestation in the Panama Canal watershed has been a problem for decades. In 1978, researchers said that clearing the forest in the watershed might kill the canal. By 1985, the forested area had dropped to 30%. As of 2000, deforestation from human population growth, land degradation, and erosion continued to harm the ecosystem. Deforestation causes erosion, which raises the bottoms of the Gatun and Alajuela lakes and lowers their ability to hold water. These lakes are very important for both canal operations and the local water supply. The Panama Canal has made it easier for invasive species to move between oceans. When the canal was expanded in 2016 with the third set of locks, global trade increased, and so did the spread of invasive species. These species cling to the ship and move from one place to another, something that without the boats, they would not have been able to do. One example is the Asian green mussel, first found in Caribbean waters in the late 1990s, which has spread through the canal. These invasive species can harm local ecosystems and compete with native species. Ships passing through the canal regularly pollute the water. For example, in 1986, a crude oil spill east of the Caribbean entrance to the canal killed plants and invertebrates in the area. The shipping industry also releases emissions of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. The Panama Canal, as a choke point, has a lot of heavy traffic and delays, which leads to burning more fuel and producing more emissions than needed. These emissions are a big concern because they contribute to climate change and increase environmental problems. The Panama Canal uses a lot of fresh water from the Gatun Lake, which is Panama City's primary source of potable water. For each ship that passes through, about 200 million liters, 52 million gallons of fresh water are needed. 1. This water use has serious environmental and social impacts. During a drought in 2019, Gatun Lake's water levels dropped to historic lows because so much water was being used for the canal. Routes competing with the Canal Nicaragua Canal main article. Nicaragua Canal on the 7th of July 2014, Wang Jing, chairman of the HK Nicaragua Canal Development Investment Co., Limited, HKND Group, advised that a route for Nicaragua's proposed canal had been approved. The construction work was projected by HKND to begin in 2014 and take 5 years, 175, although there had been little progress before the project's abandonment. 176. The Nicaraguan Parliament approved plans for the 280 kilometers, 174 miles, canal through Nicaragua, and according to the deal, the company would have been responsible for operating and maintaining the canal for a 50-year period. By May 2017, no concrete action had been reportedly taken constructing the canal, and further doubts were expressed about its financing. In February 2018, analysts widely viewed the project as defunct, though the head of the project insisted work was ongoing and HKND retained the legal rights to the concession for the canal as well as side projects. Despite HKND vanishing in April 2018, the Nicaraguan government indicates that it will continue with the 908 square kilometers, 351 square miles, tri-land expropriations within Nicaragua. Under land expropriation canal law 8 for O. Colombia rail link in 2011, Colombia's then President Juan Manuel Santos announced a proposal for a 220 kilometers, 137 miles, railway between Colombia's Pacific and Caribbean coasts. 179-180, however, in 2015 the director of the Colombia-China Chamber of Commerce said the proposal was mentioned in 2011 and subsequently. Northwest Passage main article. Northwest Passage climate change has thinned much of the ice that in the past made this route between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans impassable. Satellite navigation can help monitor location of the ice, which remains, further easing transit. A few ships have successfully crossed the previously impossible route since 2000. Interoceanic Corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec article. Interoceanic Corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, 2019. Mexico has been building a corridor of its own, known as the Interoceanic Corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec CIIT, by its initials in Spanish, which will use primarily a railway, the Tren Interoceanico, to transport cargo and passengers from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic. It opened for passenger service on the 22nd of December 2023, and all the works related to it had begun operation by July 2024. This idea is older than the Panama Canal itself, with the original Tehuantepec Railway, which is being rehabilitated for the CIIT, being inaugurated in 1907 to initial success, but falling out of use due to the Mexican Revolution and the opening of the Panama Canal in 1914. The current corridor is expected to have certain advantages over the Panama Canal, such as its speed, being able to transport cargo from one ocean to the other in about 6 hours, and its location, being closer to the United States than Panama, in addition to the creation of 10 industrial parks in the isthmus with various tax benefits to encourage. However, despite being often described as a potential alternative, competitor to the Panama Canal, the ambassador of Panama in Mexico, Alfredo Oranges, and the former director of the CIIT, Rafael Marin Maldonado, have stated that they do not see the CIIT in this way, and that they prefer to see it as a complement to the Panama Canal, which could relieve the intense traffic the canal has to cope with. The ambassador even proposed collaborating with the Mexican government to make the